A 9-year-old boy bursts into the middle of a church service, carrying his baby sister in his arms, pleading for help in a desperate act that will change their lives forever. But is his love enough to face hunger, cold, and abandonment? Discover the gripping journey of Liam and his fight for survival. Liam's house was small, made of old wood, and seemed to bear the weight of time. Inside, the scent of mildew mixed with the faint aroma of the soap he used to bathe his sister, Hannah. It was a place of silence, broken only by the wind rustling through the surrounding trees. At 9 years old, Liam was familiar with that silence, but he had never felt it so suffocating. Every corner of the house seemed to whisper the fear he tried to bury deep within his chest. Clara, his mother, had always been the heart of their home, but now she could barely get out of bed. After giving birth, her health had never recovered, and Liam had taken on a responsibility far too great for his small shoulders. The sound of her footsteps around the house had been replaced by her faint, almost imperceptible breathing. Liam wanted to believe everything would be okay, but abandonment seemed to creep in through the cracks in the door. He looked at Hannah and wondered if he could manage. Hannah, so tiny and fragile, depended on Liam for everything. He had learned, without anyone teaching him, how to warm bottles and change diapers, even with trembling hands. Her cries would pull him from sleep, but he never complained. In fact, it was almost as if that sound was the only thing keeping him alive. In moments of calm, when she was asleep, Liam felt a mixture of pride and despair. Taking care of Hannah was his mission, but the fear of failure was a constant shadow. Days in the house were a blend of improvised routines and painful silences. Liam did his best to maintain order, but the house itself seemed to breathe sadness. He tried to cheer his mother up, talking about the future, but Clara barely responded. He felt her slipping away, like a drifting boat, leaving behind an emotional trail he didn't yet know how to navigate. He couldn't understand why life had become so difficult so quickly. Nights were the hardest. When the wind battered the windows, Liam would make up stories to distract his sister. "Mom will get better," he whispered, even when he wasn't sure it was true. He tried to ignore the emptiness in his stomach and the exhaustion growing each day. But the fear was like a shadow he couldn't escape. He was only 9 years old, yet the weight of the world felt like it was in his hands. Loneliness screamed from every wall of the house. They lived far from everything, and Liam knew no one was coming. Winter was approaching, and he didn't know how they would face the cold. There was a thick blanket he used to cover Hannah, but his own skin was beginning to crack from the icy wind sneaking under the door. Emotions swirled inside him, anger at being so helpless and love for his family, the only thing he had. He often thought of his father, whom he had never met. Sometimes he imagined him showing up to save the day, like in the movies. But reality wasn't so kind, and Liam knew he could only rely on himself. He spent his days trying to be strong, but at night, when no one could see, he let the tears fall. In the dark silence, abandonment felt more real than ever, but he promised himself he wouldn't give up. The neighbors were far away, and Liam knew asking for help was risky. He had heard stories of children being taken from their families, and that terrified him. Hannah wasn't just his sister, she was his responsibility, his world. The fear of losing her kept him awake, but it also gave him the strength to carry on. He knew that if something happened to her, he would never forgive himself. But how much longer could he hold everything together alone? That morning, the air in the house felt heavier, colder than usual, and Liam felt each icy breath as a reminder of his helplessness. Hannah cried nonstop, and Clara didn't move from the bed. He knew something was terribly wrong, yet he clung to the idea that he could handle it alone. As he rocked his sister, he tried to recall what his mother used to do when he was younger and sick, but nothing seemed enough. He tried giving Hannah the last bit of milk left in the bottle, but her cries only grew louder. Each sound was like a knife to Liam's heart, bringing his worst fear to the surface: failure. He brushed his fingers across the baby's face, trying to soothe her, but the feverish heat radiating from her tiny skin made him pull back. Desperation began to build, and he looked at the door as if it were a gateway to another reality, one with help, food, and warmth. Liam approached Clara's bed, holding Hannah tightly. "Mom, you have to wake up." "I don't know what to do," he pleaded, but all he got was a faint groan. Clara seemed so far away, so disconnected, and Liam felt as if he were losing both of them at once. He knelt beside her, hot tears streaming down his face, as he promised to take care of everything. But how? He was just a boy. The decision to leave didn't come easily. The thought of opening that door and facing the unknown made his stomach churn. What if no one helped? What if he and Hannah were separated? Liam closed his eyes, trying to push away the images flooding his mind. But at the same time, he knew that every minute spent inside meant more danger. With trembling knees, he finally understood that staying was no longer an option. He began gathering what little he could: the warmest blanket, a piece of stale bread from the shelf, and an oversized coat that swallowed his small frame. As he prepared, he looked down at his sister, a mix of fear and responsibility etched into his young face. "I'll protect you, Hannah. I promise," he whispered, though he had no idea how he would keep that promise. It was a fragile thread, but it was all that kept him standing as the world seemed to crumble around him. When he opened the door, the icy wind hit him like a slap, but he didn't stop. Each step away from the house felt impossibly heavy, as if he was leaving a part of himself behind. The silence of the surrounding forest was haunting, the crunch of dry leaves underfoot echoing in his ears like a reminder of his isolation. He wanted to cry, wanted to turn back, but he couldn't. Something deep inside him insisted that moving forward was his only chance. The dirt road stretched endlessly ahead, dotted with sharp rocks that bit into his feet and curves that hid what lay beyond. Hannah squirmed weakly in his arms, her faint whimpers breaking the stillness, and Liam felt the pressure mounting. He tried humming a lullaby Clara used to sing, but his voice came out shaky. Each note seemed to dissolve into the emptiness around them, leaving him clinging to the desperate hope of finding someone, anyone. Liam rehearsed what he might say if he found help. "Please, it's my sister. She's sick," he muttered under his breath, over and over. But what if they didn't believe him? He'd heard stories of strangers turning away children in need or, worse, treating them cruelly. Fear gripped him, but the sight of Hannah's flushed, tear-streaked face kept his feet moving. He couldn't let her suffer any longer. The cold grew sharper with every passing hour, gnawing at his skin and stiffening his movements. He scanned the horizon, desperate for signs of life. A house, a light, anything, but the road seemed endless. Exhaustion weighed heavily on him, tempting him to stop, but something inside him wouldn't let him. He had to be strong, even though every fiber of his being was terrified. He had no other choice. When he spotted the faint glow of lights in the distance, his heart leapt. This was it, his chance to save Hannah and maybe find some help. But as relief swept through him, doubt crept in too. What if no one believed him? Taking a deep breath, he adjusted Hannah in his arms and pressed on. The wind seemed to whisper that the hardest part was yet to come. As he approached the outskirts of the village, a fresh wave of uncertainty hit him. The lights that had once seemed like beacons of hope now loomed with the weight of the unknown. He wondered about the people he might meet. Would they be kind or look at him with suspicion? Each step toward the village felt heavier than the last, as if fear itself were trying to drag him back. He stopped for a moment, staring up at the sky where stars were beginning to dot the darkness. The biting cold stung his skin, but the ache of abandonment in his chest was worse. What if no one wanted to help him? Or worse, what if they tried to take Hannah away? The thought was so terrifying that he nearly turned back. He loved his sister more than anything, but what would he do if she was taken from him? Liam tried to push the dark thoughts away, but they clawed their way back. He remembered the stories his mother had told him about good people who helped strangers, but also the ones about children ending up in places with strict rules and no love. He couldn't risk it. Even as Hannah whimpered softly, he hesitated, his eyes fixed on the ever-closer lights of the village. Then he heard footsteps in the distance. Someone was coming. His heart pounded wildly, threatening to burst from his chest. Instinctively, he ducked behind a tree, clutching Hannah even closer. He couldn't tell if it was the cold or the fear making his hands tremble, but he felt an overwhelming need to hide. As the sound of footsteps faded away, Liam realized that he wasn't just fighting the outside world, he was battling himself. Looking down at Hannah's fragile face, he felt torn. part of him wanted to run back to the familiarity of their home, where at least he knew what to expect. But another part, the braver part, knew that staying meant risking her life. He took a deep breath, trying to summon strength. It felt like a knot had formed in his throat, choking back the words he wanted to scream. "I just need help." Is that too much to ask? He began walking again, though his thoughts refused to quiet. What if no one believed him? Or worse, what if they blamed him for Clara's condition? The weight of his fears pressed down on him, and he felt tears welling up. He glanced at Hannah, now peacefully asleep despite the cold, her tiny face a picture of serenity. It gave him a small sense of comfort, but also an even greater sense of responsibility. He had to keep going. As he drew closer to the village, the lights became clearer. He could see houses now, some with curtains drawn tight and others glowing warmly from within. The faint sound of laughter drifted from somewhere, a stark contrast to the oppressive silence he was used to. He felt like an outsider, as if this world wasn't meant for him. But he knew he had to try. He just didn't know how. He stopped in front of a house, his legs frozen in place. He could knock and ask for help, but the words wouldn't come. What if they didn't see a boy pleading for help but instead saw a problem? He ran a hand over his face, trying to wipe away the growing despair. "I can't do this," he whispered to himself, his voice breaking. It felt like he was trapped in an internal battle, with fear always winning. For a moment, he considered waiting until morning, but he knew time was against him. Every passing minute left Hannah more vulnerable, and Clara was still alone back at home. Closing his eyes, he searched for courage within himself. His mother always said he was stronger than he thought, but in that moment he didn't feel strong. Still, something deep inside urged him to move forward. With one last glance at the village lights, Liam adjusted Hannah in his arms and began walking again. He had no idea where he was heading, but he knew he couldn't stop. Whether it was the cold or sheer desperation, Liam realized he had to keep moving, even as every part of him screamed to turn back. He felt as though a greater decision awaited him further ahead, propelling him forward step by step. The lights of the church glowed like a beacon in the midst of the cold and darkness. Liam hesitated at the entrance, the warmth from inside contrasting sharply with the biting wind that enveloped him. He looked down at Hannah, nestled in his arms, and took a deep breath. It was now or never. The heavy door creaked as he pushed it open, and he was immediately engulfed by the murmurs of voices and the soft sound of a choir in the background. The moment he entered, all eyes turned toward him. Liam felt the weight of their stares. Puzzled, curious, some even irritated by his interruption. Fear tightened around his chest, but there was no turning back. He walked hesitantly down the central aisle, his feet heavy as lead, murmuring under his breath, "Please, someone help me." But his voice was barely audible, swallowed by the vastness of the church. Then Erin saw him. Sitting in the back pews, she was a newly qualified nurse, unaware that this moment would change her life. The desperation in Liam's eyes immediately caught her attention. Without a second thought, she stood and approached him. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" she asked, her voice low but urgent. Her presence seemed to shatter the tension in the room, and Liam finally found the courage to speak. "My sister, she's sick. She's at home, but she can't get up," he explained, his words tumbling out in a rush. Erin glanced at Hannah, her tiny face flushed and eyes closed, and her heart clenched. There wasn't a moment to lose. Placing a reassuring hand on Liam's shoulder, she said, "It's going to be okay. I'm going to help you." For the first time, Liam felt like he wasn't alone. As Erin quickly examined the baby, a young priest, Max, approached, drawn by the commotion. His calm demeanor and gentle voice were a stark contrast to the buzz of whispers around them. "How can we help?" he asked, concern etched into his features. Together, Erin and Max began to formulate a plan while Liam clung tightly to Hannah, as if afraid she might slip away. Some in the congregation began to murmur among themselves, with a few expressing irritation at the disruption. But Max raised his hand, silencing the crowd. "What we have here is an opportunity to show compassion," he said firmly. Meanwhile, Erin had already decided she would take Liam and Hannah to the hospital immediately. But first, she needed more information. "Where's your mom, Liam?" she asked, gently cradling the baby. "She's really sick, at home." "I didn't know what else to do," Liam replied, tears streaming down his face. Max exchanged a quick glance with Aaron, and both recognized the gravity of the situation. Aaron squeezed Liam's hand and assured him, "You did exactly what you needed to. Now we'll handle this together." Her words were a balm to Liam's weary heart, which had known only the weight of abandonment until now. While Aaron explained the next steps to Liam, Max took charge of calming the crowd and organizing a group to check on Clara. Volunteers quickly gathered to head to the family's home and assess her condition. The plan was coming together, but Liam's gaze remained fixed on Hannah. He still felt solely responsible for her, as though relinquishing control would mean admitting defeat. When Aaron gently took Hannah from his arms, Liam hesitated for a moment. The fear lingered, but there was something about Aaron's steady hands and kind eyes that made him trust her. "I'll care for her as if she were my own sister," Aaron said, looking him straight in the eye. Liam took a shaky breath and nodded, still wrestling with the emotions swirling within him. It felt strange to hope, but he knew he couldn't do this alone anymore. As Max directed Liam to follow Aaron to her car, the boy looked back at the church he was leaving behind. It felt like stepping through a portal. He didn't know what lay ahead, but for the first time, he had allies by his side. The path forward would be hard, but now, he felt like he could take the next step. The night was freezing, and rain began to fall as Liam left the church with Aaron carrying Hannah. The sound of raindrops on the cobblestone street created a steady rhythm, matching Aaron's hurried pace as she guided him. Liam glanced around, the weight of what had just happened settling heavily on his chest. Doubts gnawed at him. Had he made the right choice? Aaron, focused and calm, was already mentally mapping out the steps ahead. She kept her voice soft, trying to reassure Liam, but his attention was fixed on the faint sound of Hannah's breathing. It was his anchor, proof that she was still there, that he was keeping his promise. The biting cold was nothing compared to the fear still gripping his heart. Aaron's car was parked on a nearby street. She opened the passenger door and helped Liam climb inside, carefully placing Hannah in the back seat. The old car smelled faintly of spilled coffee, and the worn upholstery felt rough against Liam's fingers. It was his first time in a car, and though everything about it was unfamiliar, it felt oddly safe. As the engine roared to life, Liam clutched the edges of the seat, bracing himself for what came next. As Aaron drove, she glanced in the rearview mirror at Hannah and Liam, who sat quietly, lost in thought. "It's okay, Liam. We'll be at the hospital in just a few minutes," she said, trying to fill the silence. He nodded but couldn't find the words to reply. Everything felt unreal, like a dream he couldn't tell would end well or badly. Outside, the streets were nearly deserted. The glow of streetlights reflected off puddles, creating shimmering patterns that shifted as the car moved. Liam's wide eyes took in everything, noting every detail as if the world was larger and more chaotic than he'd ever imagined. He wanted to ask Aaron so many questions, but the words stayed trapped. He wasn't sure yet if he could completely trust her. When they arrived at the hospital, Aaron parked quickly and got out, carefully cradling Hannah in her arms. Liam hesitated for a moment, staring at the large illuminated building. He'd never been in a place like this, and the size of the revolving doors made him nervous. But Aaron's reassuring look gave him the courage to follow her, even though his legs trembled with every step. The warmth inside was an immediate relief. The bright, white hallways were filled with bustling people, hurried voices, and the occasional beeping of machines. To Liam, it was overwhelming and intimidating. He clung to Aaron's arm without realizing it, as if afraid he'd get lost in the maze. Aaron noticed and gave him a comforting smile. "We're going to take care of both of you. I promise." Liam's gaze never left Hannah as Aaron handed her over to a nurse. He wanted to ask what they were going to do, to make sure they wouldn't take her away. But before he could speak, Aaron placed a firm yet gentle hand on his shoulders. "Trust me, Liam. She's going to be fine. Now we need to talk about your mom. Where exactly is she?" Her calm demeanor was steady, but the urgency in her voice was clear. Liam explained quietly how Clara was alone at home, unable to move. Aaron nodded, her mind already working through the next steps. She pulled out her phone and began making quick calls, arranging for a team to check on Clara's condition. Liam swallowed hard, the knot in his throat tightening. He had done everything he could, but he couldn't shake the guilt that he might have waited too long to ask for help. Meanwhile, a doctor arrived to examine Hannah, and Liam stood frozen, watching from a distance. He wanted to stay by her side, to make sure she was safe, but he didn't know if he was allowed. The tension in his chest felt unbearable, but Erin's presence nearby offered silent support. For the first time, Liam started to believe he might not have to carry this burden alone. As the doctors worked on Hannah, Liam stayed motionless in the corner of the room, arms crossed tightly across his chest like he was shielding himself from something invisible. Every strange sound from the machines made him hold his breath. Erin stayed by his side, squeezing his hand when she noticed his trembling. "She's in good hands," she whispered, but Liam wasn't sure if he could believe her. The fear lingered like a shadow he couldn't shake. Not everyone in the hospital was as understanding. A man in a suit, someone Liam didn't recognize, arrived with a stern expression and began firing rapid questions at Erin about Liam, his sister, and his mother. Erin tried to explain, but the man's tone was cold and clinical. Liam eyed him warily, his emotions bubbling beneath the surface. Who was this man to judge them? Erin remained calm, but Liam could see the tension in her face. "These kids need care, not an interrogation," she said firmly as the man jotted notes in a small notebook. He seemed more focused on following protocol than on understanding the situation. Liam wanted to yell at him to leave, but all he could do was squeeze Erin's hand tighter. He feared this man might be an enemy, someone who could separate him from Hannah. Thankfully, not everyone was like that. Father Max arrived at the hospital shortly after, his presence soothing. He sat next to Liam and spoke gently, without pressure. "What you did today was very brave," he said, his voice kind and steady. Liam didn't know why, but Max's words had a calming effect. For the first time in hours, he felt like there were people who truly cared. The doctors returned with good news. Hannah was stable but needed to stay in the hospital to treat her pneumonia. Erin explained everything to Liam, making sure he understood it was the best option for his sister. Even so, his chest tightened as he watched her being taken to another room. "Can I go with her?" he asked, his voice trembling. Erin shook her head gently. "For now, they need to do their work. But you can see her tomorrow, okay?" Meanwhile, Max took charge of organizing help for Clara. He contacted emergency services and ensured someone would go to her house immediately. Liam listened from a distance, a mix of relief and guilt washing over him. He couldn't stop thinking about his mother, alone in their cold home. Had he waited too long to act? The weight of responsibility clung to him, even with so many people now involved. The hours at the hospital dragged on. Liam sat in an uncomfortable chair as Erin moved back and forth, filling out paperwork and discussing things with the doctors. A few people passing by gave him curious looks, but he tried to ignore them. Max's presence beside him was the only thing keeping him grounded. The priest spoke softly about hope and how small acts of courage could change everything. Liam listened, though he wasn't sure he believed it yet. The man in the suit returned, this time with a social worker. The woman's demeanor was kinder, but her questions were still hard to answer. "Do you have any other relatives who can help?" she asked softly. Liam shook his head. He didn't know anyone else besides Clara and Hannah. The thought of being separated from them was unbearable, and he made that clear in every answer he gave. Erin and Max stepped in, ensuring Liam wasn't overwhelmed by the questioning. For the first time, Liam felt like he wasn't completely alone. But as the hours ticked by and the weight of everything settled in, he realized that this was only the beginning of a much longer journey. As the night wore on, Liam felt the heavy pull of exhaustion, but sleep wouldn't come. He stared at the ceiling, trying to imagine what the next day would bring. So many problems needed solving, and he didn't know how it would all end. Erin approached again, this time holding a cup of hot chocolate she had grabbed from the hospital cafeteria. "I know this has been a tough day," she said, handing it to him. "But you've done so well, Liam. Don't forget that." Despite the challenges and judgmental looks he'd faced, Liam realized he had found invaluable allies. Erin and Max truly seemed to care about him and his family, something he hadn't expected. Yet even with this newfound support, He couldn't shake the fear that the worst was still to come. The following morning, the hospital was quieter. The once bustling corridors were now strangely calm. Liam woke up in an uncomfortable chair, the sharp scent of disinfectant filling his nose. Erin appeared with a gentle smile, carrying a tray with bread and milk. "Eat something, Liam. You'll need your strength for what's ahead," she said, placing the food before him. He wanted to refuse, but his empty stomach forced him to accept. As he ate in silence, his thoughts were consumed by Hannah. "Can I see her now?" he asked quietly. Erin nodded and led him to the room where his sister was. When they entered, Liam saw Hannah lying in a small bed, connected to wires and machines that hummed rhythmically. Her face looked calmer, and he noticed her fever had subsided. Relief washed over him, but a shadow of fear lingered in the back of his mind. Liam sat beside Hannah's bed, holding her tiny hand. It felt as if the entire world had narrowed to this moment, to this room. Erin watched from a distance, giving him space to be with his sister. She knew Liam was carrying an enormous weight for someone his age and wished she could lighten it. But there was another urgent matter they needed to address. Clara. Max brought the news. He entered the room with a serious but not alarming expression. "We found your mom," he said, sitting beside Liam. "She was very weak, but the paramedics took her to the hospital. She's being cared for now." Liam felt as though the ground shifted beneath him. Relief that Clara was safe mingled with a suffocating guilt. Had he waited too long to seek help? Max noticed the turmoil in Liam's eyes and placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. "You did the best you could, Liam. More than many would have done," he said gently. But the words didn't seem to break through the barrier of guilt Liam had built around himself. He glanced at Hannah, so small and vulnerable, and wondered if she would have survived without Erin and Max. He couldn't shake the feeling that he hadn't been enough. Meanwhile, Erin was on the phone, coordinating with social workers and doctors. She returned to the room with an urgent tone. "Liam, we need to talk about what happens next," she said, kneeling to meet his gaze. "Your mom is getting the care she needs, but she might not be able to come home for a while. And Hannah, she'll need constant medical follow-ups." Liam stared at her, trying to process everything. "And me," he whispered. "Where will I go?" Erin exchanged a quick glance with Max before answering. "For now, you'll stay with us, close to your sister and your mom. But we need to make sure all of you are safe." The weight of her words sank heavily on Liam's shoulders. Even with Erin and Max by his side, an unsettling uncertainty loomed over him. Throughout the day, Liam moved between Hannah's room and the waiting area, trying to muster the courage to visit Clara. He knew he needed to see her, but the thought of finding her even weaker than before paralyzed him. Erin encouraged him but didn't push. She understood that Liam needed to process his feelings in his own time. Meanwhile, Hannah continued to improve, offering him a small glimmer of hope. When Liam finally decided to see Clara, Erin and Max accompanied him. The hallway leading to her room seemed endless, each step making his heart race faster. As he entered, he saw his mother lying in the bed, her face pale but her eyes slightly open. "Liam," she murmured, reaching out with difficulty. He rushed to her side, gripping her hand tightly as silent tears streamed down his face. Despite her frailty, Clara managed a small smile. "You saved us." The brief comfort of her words couldn't erase the weight of the challenges ahead. Clara would need a long time to recover, and Liam would have to adjust to a new reality. But as he looked at Erin and Max, standing as pillars of support, he realized he wasn't entirely alone. Still, a persistent fear whispered in his mind. What if everything fell apart again? He would need every ounce of strength to face what was coming. Clara's room was cold and quiet, the steady beeping of machines the only sound breaking the heavy silence. Liam hesitated at the door, his feet rooted to the spot. He knew he needed to go in, but the fear of seeing her worse than he imagined held him back. Erin placed a gentle hand on his shoulder, her expression encouraging. With unsteady steps, he crossed the threshold. Clara looked fragile in the bed, her pale face turned toward the window. Beside her, a tray of medicine and an IV drip were the only signs she was receiving care. "Mom," Liam murmured, his voice barely audible. When she opened her eyes, A faint light flickered in them, as though his presence was the strength she needed. "You're here," Clara whispered, a small smile forming before it faded into concern. The weight of everything crashed over Liam like a wave. He told Clara everything, about leaving the house, carrying Hannah, and finding help. She listened in silence, tears slipping down her cheeks. "You were so brave," she said, her voice weak but full of emotion. Despite her words, Liam couldn't escape the crushing guilt. He kept thinking he should have done more, should have acted faster. Yet, as Clara gently squeezed his hand, he felt the smallest flicker of something he hadn't felt in a long time: hope. As Liam held his mother's hand, Erin stepped into the room, her expression carrying a touch of warmth. "Hannah is responding well to the treatment," she said, offering a reassuring smile. Clara attempted to sit up, but her body's weakness held her back. "I want to see my baby," she said, her voice filled with determination. Erin promised that as soon as it was safe, she would take Clara to see Hannah. But first, Clara needed to focus on her recovery. The momentary relief was interrupted by an unexpected arrival. A social worker entered the room, her expression serious. "We need to discuss the future of these children," she said, addressing Clara directly. Liam felt a chill run down his spine. He knew what those words meant. "They can't go back home until it's safe," the woman continued. Clara nodded, but Liam could see the pain in her eyes. It was as though she was fighting her own body to protect her family. As the conversation unfolded, Liam realized how little control he had over what would happen next. He looked to Erin and Max, who worked to calm the situation, assuring everyone they would do everything possible to keep the family together. Yet, uncertainty wrapped tightly around Liam's chest, like a vice. He wanted to scream, to insist they would be fine as long as they stayed together, but the words wouldn't come. It was as if the weight of fear and abandonment had returned, ready to crush him. Later, as Clara rested, Liam returned to Hannah's room. He sat by her side, holding her tiny hand. "I'll take care of you, no matter what happens," he whispered, as though making a renewed promise. Deep down, though, he knew he couldn't do it alone. What he didn't expect was for help to come in such an unexpected way. Erin and Max appeared in the doorway, their faces serious yet kind, bringing a proposal that would change everything. "Liam," Erin began gently, "we spoke with the social worker. They want to make sure you and your sister have support while your mom recovers. We want to help, but we need you to trust us." Liam's eyes darted between them, struggling to process their words. Depending on others was terrifying, but something in Erin and Max's steady gazes made him feel, for the first time, that it might be possible. The next day, Liam watched as his mother was wheeled to a recovery ward. She waved to him, her smile stronger than it had been in days. "It's going to be okay," she said, and for the first time, Liam felt that she truly believed it. He held Hannah a little tighter, silently vowing to do whatever it took to keep her safe. The road ahead was uncertain, but he understood now that he wasn't walking it alone. As the days at the hospital passed, Liam began to find a rhythm. Though still nervous, he grew more comfortable with the routine. Hannah continued to improve, and every time he saw her breathing steadily, he felt a wave of relief. She no longer looked as fragile, and the once intimidating sound of the medical monitors had become almost comforting. He spent hours by her side, watching her tiny chest rise and fall, each breath a small victory. Clara, too, showed signs of recovery. When Liam visited her in the recovery ward, her voice was clearer, and she even managed to smile. "You're my hero, you know that?" she said one day, holding his hand. Liam didn't respond, but her words lingered in his mind. He didn't feel like a hero, he was just trying to keep his family together. Still, hearing it from his mother warmed his heart in a way he hadn't felt in a long time. Erin and Max remained by his side, their presence becoming a steady source of comfort. Erin explained every step of Hannah's and Clara's treatments, while Max offered calm advice that eased some of Liam's worries. "You don't have to carry everything alone," Max said one evening as they sat in the waiting area. Liam glanced at him, and for the first time, began to believe it might be true. One afternoon, Erin brought a bowl of hot soup and invited Liam to eat with her in the hospital cafeteria. He hesitated, reluctant to leave Hannah, but Erin reassured him she would be fine. As he sipped the soup, Liam realized how hungry he was, not just for food, but for comfort and something that made him feel human again. Erin shared light-hearted stories from her nursing school days, and for the first time in days, Liam found himself smiling. When he returned to Hannah's room, he noticed a new, soft blanket covering her. It had been left by a nurse. Liam ran his fingers over the plush fabric, feeling gratitude for these small acts of kindness. He realized that while he was used to fighting on his own, there were people around him willing to help. Each gesture, no matter how small, ignited a spark of hope within him. Later that day, Max brought a surprise, a small illustrated book. "I thought you might want to read this to your sister," he said with a kind smile. Liam took the book, feeling a mix of gratitude and embarrassment. Sitting beside Hannah, he began to read in a soft voice. Though she was too young to understand the words, the sound of her brother's voice seemed to soothe her. For Liam, it was a moment of connection he wouldn't trade for anything. Clara was finally well enough for a brief visit with Hannah, and the moment was filled with emotion. "She's as strong as you," Clara said, tears welling in her eyes as she gazed at her daughter. Liam felt the weight of every decision he'd made so far, but for the first time, that weight seemed shared. It was no longer him against the world. He had Erin, Max, and even his recovering mother by his side. That night, as Liam lay on a makeshift couch in the hospital, he reflected on everything that had happened. The uncertainties were still there, but he no longer felt consumed by fear. The warmth of the blanket covering him, the distant sound of nurses and doctors laughing in the hallway, it all felt like signs that the worst was finally behind him. He closed his eyes, allowing himself to drift into a peace he hadn't felt in what seemed like forever. Although the road ahead was still uncertain, Liam knew his family was on the path to recovery. He had a new support network, and that made all the difference. As he listened to Hannah's steady breathing in the room next door, he promised himself that he would keep fighting, now with the certainty that he was no longer alone. The love and support he found amidst the chaos were rewards he had never expected. As the weeks went by, the hospital no longer felt like an unfamiliar place to Liam. He knew exactly where the hot drink machines were, the best times to find the cafeteria empty, and even which nurses enjoyed sharing funny stories to distract the patients. Despite becoming more familiar with the environment, Liam longed for the day he could take Hannah and Clara home. He missed his little world, even with all its difficulties, so much that it was almost unbearable. Finally, the long-awaited moment arrived. Hannah was ready to be discharged, and Clara, although still fragile, could also continue her recovery at home with medical supervision. Liam helped Erin place Hannah into a borrowed baby car seat provided by one of the nurses. He looked at his mother, who could now walk with assistance, and felt a mix of relief and pride. They were together again, even though the road ahead still seemed long. Max had arranged for Liam's house to be minimally prepared for their return. He and a few church volunteers had cleaned the rooms, fixed windows that wouldn't close properly, and even left a basket of basic food supplies in the kitchen. When Liam walked through the door, carrying Hannah in his arms, he felt a wave of warmth wash over him. The house felt different, not just because it was more organized, but because it now carried the promise of a new beginning. Clara sat in the chair by the fireplace, her face tired but lit up with a smile. "We're back," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. Liam placed Hannah in her lap, watching the connection between mother and daughter. He sat on the floor beside them, feeling for the first time in a long while that maybe things could get better. Erin and Max were there too, helping organize the final details before leaving. While Max checked the repairs they had made around the house, Erin pulled Liam aside for a private conversation. "You've been incredible, Liam. But remember what I told you at the hospital? You don't have to carry everything alone." He looked at her, letting those words sink in. It was hard to accept help, but he knew that without Erin and Max, they would never have made it this far. "I know," he said with a small smile. "Thank you for everything." In the days that followed, Liam began adjusting to their new routine. Clara still needed plenty of rest, but now she could talk to him, something that had felt so distant before. Hannah started smiling again and responding to sounds, filling the house with an energy Liam hadn't realized he'd missed. He began to see that, while challenges remained, fear and abandonment no longer felt as overwhelming as they once had. The social workers continued their regular visits, but unlike before, Liam now felt less intimidated by them. Aaron always checked in, bringing small surprises for Hannah and practical advice for Clara. Max also stopped by with food or just to share a peaceful conversation. Liam's house, which had once felt so isolated, now seemed full of life. Liam also began allowing himself to dream again. He thought about how he could improve his family's life, how to better care for his sister, and how to help his mother fully recover. He still carried the weight of responsibility, but now he knew he had allies to help him face any storm. Every smile from Hannah and every improvement in Clara's health was a reminder that they were moving forward. One afternoon, while Clara rested and Hannah napped, Liam stepped outside to the backyard and sat beneath a tree. He looked at the horizon, the cold wind brushing against his face, but this time without its usual harshness. He thought about everything he had been through and how much he had changed. The courage he had discovered within himself wasn't something he would have chosen, but it was something he now deeply valued. The journey wasn't over, but Liam was ready for whatever came next. He knew that the love he had for his family, combined with the support of Aaron, Max, and so many others, was enough to face any challenge. He closed his eyes for a moment, letting the feeling of peace surround him. The path forward wasn't just physical, it was also a return to what truly mattered: love, unity, and hope. The first rays of sunlight streamed through the living room window as Liam woke up on the sofa, wrapped in the blanket Aaron had brought. The smell of fresh bread from the kitchen made his stomach growl, and he got up, still drowsy, to find Clara attempting to make breakfast. "You shouldn't be up," he said, rushing to help her. Clara smiled, leaning on the counter for support. "I'm stronger than you think," she replied, with a sparkle in her eyes that Liam hadn't seen in months. That day, the house felt different. It wasn't just the sunlight streaming through the freshly cleaned windows or the gentle sound of Hannah playing with a rattle in her makeshift crib. It was something deeper, a sense of renewal, as if all the hardships they had faced had been a test to bring them to this moment. Liam looked around and felt a quiet pride. They had survived together, and that was all that mattered. Max arrived later, carrying a bag of fresh fruit and a new blanket for Clara. He found Liam in the backyard, stacking firewood for the fireplace. "How are you feeling, champ?" he asked in his usual warm tone. Liam thought for a moment before answering. "Still tired, but I think we're good," he said with a shy smile. Max laughed and gave him a gentle pat on the shoulder. "That's what matters." As Max helped Liam stack the firewood, Aaron arrived with a baby stroller for Hannah. "Now you can take her for walks," she said as Clara thanked her with tears in her eyes. Aaron seemed to have a knack for bringing both practicality and comfort with every gesture. Seeing Hannah in the new stroller, Liam realized that small moments of happiness were beginning to fill the void left by months of struggle. Clara, though still recovering, began showing signs of the person she was before it all happened. She talked more with Liam, encouraged him to dream again, and even laughed at Hannah's little antics. "You know, Liam, you're the strongest person I know," she said one day while he was preparing dinner. He smiled, unsure how to respond, but deep down he felt like he was finally starting to believe it. The days became lighter, and Liam learned to accept help from others without feeling weak because of it. Aaron continued visiting, offering advice and care, while Max would drop by with funny stories to entertain Hannah. The house, once filled with abandonment and fear, was now a place of laughter, conversations, and new memories. Liam realized that the weight he carried didn't have to be borne alone. One day, while walking with Hannah in her new stroller, Liam stopped in front of the church where it all began. He looked at the large doorway and felt a shiver run through him. It was there that he had made his first plea for help, unsure of how it would be received. Now, looking back on that moment, he felt no shame or despair. He felt proud of himself for having had the courage to step through that door. When he returned home, he found Clara on the porch, sitting in the sunlight with a book in her hands. She looked so serene, so different from the woman he had carried in his thoughts, full of fear. He looked at her, then at Hannah, and felt something new inside, a quiet joy, accompanied by a sense of accomplishment. The journey had been hard, but every step had led him to this moment. Liam's transformation wasn't just about survival. It was about learning to trust, to accept help, and to find strength in the most unexpected places. He looked toward the horizon, the sun shining brightly, and realized the world wasn't as frightening as it once seemed. He had changed, grown, and now knew that no matter what the future held, he would be ready to face it. Time passed, and the house that once felt like a lonely refuge was now full of life. The kitchen was always filled with welcoming aromas, fresh bread, warm soups, and occasionally cookies Clara had started baking to cheer up Liam and Hannah. The once dusty windows now let in sunlight, illuminating the little home that seemed to have been reborn. Liam, sitting at the table, helped Hannah hold a spoon while Clara laughed at the baby's clumsy attempts to feed herself. The routine, once an overwhelming burden, now brought a sense of comfort. Liam discovered that small gestures, watering the plants Clara tended on the porch or telling bedtime stories to Hannah, were like building blocks of a new foundation. He felt stronger, more capable, and for the first time in a long time, he looked toward the future with hope. Fear and abandonment were still part of his memory, but now they felt like chapters of a book he had already closed. Max continued visiting the family, offering not just spiritual support but genuine friendship. He would bring bags of fresh fruit or stop by just to share a conversation. "You're building something beautiful here," he said one afternoon, watching Liam and Clara play with Hannah in the yard. Liam looked at the priest and smiled, feeling a warmth that wasn't just from the sun. He knew Max was right. Erin didn't abandon them either. Whenever possible, she came by to check on Clara or take Hannah to her pediatric appointments. One day, she brought a box of used toys, donated by her hospital colleagues. "These are for Hannah," she said as Clara's eyes filled with tears of gratitude. Erin turned to Liam and added, "And for you too, in case you feel like playing a little." He laughed, realizing he was finally able to relax around her. Hannah, now healthier, was the heart of the home. Each laugh of hers seemed to erase the shadows of the past. Liam carried her on his shoulders, showing her the few trees that surrounded the yard, inventing stories about magical kingdoms and brave heroes. He didn't say it aloud, but he knew those stories were, in a way, about himself, a boy who had faced the world to protect the ones he loved. Clara, though still recovering, had regained her spark. She spent hours planning ways to improve the house or teach Liam something new. "You're so clever," she would say, watching him solve small problems with the improvised tools Max had brought over. Liam didn't think of himself as special, but his mother's confidence in him made something inside him grow, something he was starting to recognize as pride. One afternoon, while tidying up a cabinet, Liam found the blanket he had used to wrap Hannah on the night he left home. He stood still for a moment, holding the worn fabric, and felt a wave of emotions. That blanket was more than just a piece of cloth. It was a symbol of everything he had endured. He folded it carefully and tucked it away, as though archiving an important part of his story. Though the present was peaceful, Liam knew the future would still bring challenges. Clara continued to have medical appointments, and money was tight. But he no longer felt like he was facing it all alone. He had Erin, Max, and most importantly, his family. They were his strength, his reason to keep going. Every difficulty seemed smaller now that he knew love could overcome even the darkest moments. As the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange, Liam sat in the yard with Hannah on his lap. Clara was on the porch, sewing something by the soft twilight, and the smell of freshly baked bread wafted from the kitchen, mingling with the low hum of music Max had left playing on the radio. Liam took a deep breath, feeling the peace he had searched for so long. He looked at Hannah, then at Clara, and deep in his heart he knew they were finally home.